Isn't it a great day to be a Christian? Open your Bibles to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. We've been looking on Sunday evenings at the 10 Commandments, and tonight we're down to commandment number 7. Commandment number 7 is found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. And it says very simply, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." The last 5 commandments are stated very simply. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And Lord willing, next Sunday night we'll cover the last 3 in one lesson. But last week we spent a little extra time on thou shalt not kill, because thou shalt not kill doesn't forbid all killing. The death penalty, capital offenses are still permitted. People are still allowed to kill. So what does it mean? So we talked about what thou shalt not kill does mean and doesn't mean. Thou shalt not steal and lie and covet. Those are pretty simple. I think we can get those all in one week. But thou shalt not commit adultery is something that we need to spend a little time talking about. Because committing adultery was a sin under the law of Moses. I'll go ahead and cut to the chase. It's still a sin in the New Testament. We'll talk about that some more later. But it's not frowned upon nearly as much in society as it used to be. So tonight we're going to take a little bit closer look at this commandment, try to get the big picture. Our society takes adultery lightly, but under the Old Testament it was a capital offense. The death penalty was held for those that committed adultery. It was listed right after thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, and both of them carried the death sentence. We need to understand as Christians, just because adultery is not as frowned on as it used to be, just because it's not against the law of the land, it doesn't mean that it's okay under the law of Christ. So God's promised in the New Testament to judge those who commit adultery. Look at Hebrews chapter 13. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4. The New Testament says, "Marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge." Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, beginning in verse 9, we see adulterers are lumped in with a list of pretty unsavory characters. It says, "Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not enter the kingdom of heaven? Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of God." So adultery is viewed by God as a serious transgression of His word. Why? Well, some people say because adultery can destroy friendships, can destroy marriages, can destroy families, can bring the destruction of the lives of children. Adultery is a serious business. So let's spend a few moments discussing that and how we can avoid having that come into our own lives. Let's begin in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Go to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, Jesus addressed this question beginning in verse 27. He said this, "Ye've heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. If thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, cast it from thee, for it's profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it from thee, for it's profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell." Remember, Jesus had just been talking to his disciples up in Matthew 5, verse 20, and he said, "For I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter in the kingdom of heaven." And that was confusing for his disciples, because the scribes and the Pharisees were the most righteous people they knew. They were the ones that stood on the street corner showing everybody how righteous they were. They wanted everybody to know how good they were, how righteous they were, how pure they were. And Jesus said, you've got to be more righteous than them or you're not going to go to heaven. And they're confused. So to explain it to them, he used a series of contrasts. He said, you've heard it said, but here's what I say. And so he distinguished what they had heard of old from what the Bible really meant, what he was declaring to them now. Now the commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery, in Exodus 20 verse 14, that wasn't what he was talking about when he said you've heard of old. He was talking about the tradition of the elders, the things that they passed down, what the old people said, what they'd passed down from generation to generation. And that commandment was part of that. They were saying thou shalt not commit adultery, but when they recited this commandment, apparently all they were saying is don't do that. Don't do that act. And as long as you didn't commit the act, you weren't guilty of transgressing the law. And Jesus said they're emphasizing the act of the law, but they're not talking about the spirit of the law. They may be working on the letter. The Pharisees were good on the letter of the law. They wanted to do everything just exactly like it was. They didn't understand the spirit behind it. So Jesus is teaching his disciples the spirit behind the law. The Bible doesn't look at things the way man does. We look at the outside, and God looks at the heart. That's what Jesus was talking about when he's talking about looking at a woman to lust for. Matthew 5:27 says, you've heard it said, that's what the tradition of the elders said, don't commit adultery. He said, don't look at somebody to lust after her. You've committed adultery with her in your heart. Now, looking is not the problem. Looking is not a sin. We can't go through life. Men can't go through a day without looking at women. That's not the problem. It's looking to lust. If you look up lust in the dictionary, it says it's a strong desire, an intense longing, especially an unbridled sexual desire. You can look at somebody, but when you start thinking the wrong thoughts, that's when it becomes a sin. We need to be careful because looking can lead to trouble. Look at James chapter 1. James chapter 1, verse 14. James said, but every man is tempted when he's drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. And sin, when it's finished, bringeth forth death. Jesus said, be careful how you look. Don't just not commit adultery. Don't look at somebody and think those thoughts. Keep your heart clean. And his interpretation of this law was in harmony with the rest of the law of Moses. Next Sunday, Lord willing, we'll talk about thou shalt not covet. Part of that commandment says thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Don't look at somebody if it leads you to think the wrong thoughts. Unwarranted desire of anything is sin. Unwanted desire of a woman by a man is adultery. And it was wrong even before the commandment came out. Look back in the Old Testament book of Job. Job lived before Moses. Job lived before the law. Job lived before this was all written down, but even he realized that it was a sin to lust. Look at Job chapter 31, in the first verse. Job said this, I made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? Now, King James English is hard to understand sometimes, and Job was written in a poetic language, so it's even harder. But what this is saying, literally translated, Job said, I made an agreement with my eyes not to look at a young woman that would make me want to think bad things about her. Okay? Job said, I've made an agreement with my eyes. I've already made up my mind. I've decided before I look what I'm going to think, what I'm not going to think. And that's what Jesus was teaching, that adultery grows from a heart problem. Go back to the New Testament book of Mark. Jesus is teaching in Mark chapter 7. And he says this, beginning in verse 21. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile the man. Jesus said it's not what you do, it's what you think. And you won't do these evil things if you don't think evil things. And there's a way to prevent that. If we could prevent lusting, then adultery could be nipped in the bud. And that gets us to another problem that's going on in our current society. I've heard somebody said that it's a sin to look on some woman with adulterous thoughts. Somebody else said it's impossible to commit adultery by yourself. Some of those people that you're looking at are guilty too. And that is true. If you look at the situation, now not every woman that somebody looks at and thinks evil of is guilty of sinning, but some of them are intentionally trying to tempt men. I read an article from the London Daily News, and it was talking about why do women dress the way they dress. And here's some quotes from that article. The reporter said, the standard uniform, micro miniskirts, sky-high heels, and low tops was once worn only by prostitutes on dingy street corners, but now it's a mainstream style adopted by almost every female clubber and partygoer under the age of 30. She went on to write this, why do they cheapen themselves so, especially at a time when young women have never had a greater opportunity to reject crass sexual stereotypes of old? After all, girls are outperforming boys at every stage of schooling. In the workplace, female employees are starting to outperform their male counterparts. Why is it then, in an age of true equal opportunity, that so many women are dressing in such a demeaning way? So they asked this question, and then to answer it, they interviewed one of these young women, a young lady named Joanne. It says, Joanne had no qualms about sharing the reasons why she dresses so provocatively. She said, you have to dress in a certain way to get attention. So I never dress in jeans. I just wouldn't like it. I always want to wear slutty clothes. She wears clothes like that to get attention. The article concludes with this. It says, it'd be tempting to dismiss her comments as a one-off, but among the stripper chic girls whom we interviewed, it was clear that there are many others like her, ordinary women dressing in a deliberately sexualized style. Among their numbers were students, nurses, accountants, social workers, full-time mothers. When asked why they reveal so much of themselves, the answer came back time and time again. It's for confidence. Why do they dress that way? To get attention. They don't have any self-confidence, and so they're trying to develop self-confidence, and they know that they can get attention. They can get people to give them approval. They can get men to approve of them if they show them more. And so they do that to get more attention. Brethren, causing somebody else to sin is a sin. The Bible teaches that. Look at Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18, verse 7. It says, woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. Basically, that says, sadly, we live in a world of great temptations. That's a bad thing that we live in that world. But woe to those that cause those temptations. Woe to people that try to entice people to sin. Now, the women in that newspaper article were doing that intentionally, but there are people that do that without thinking about it. Cindy Colley, I don't know, some of you know who that is. She's the lady that wrote the Bible study that some of our women are doing over at Rutherford. She spoke at Polishing the Pulpit. Well, I couldn't go hear what she said because they won't let the men listen to the women speak. And I didn't write this down, but this was in a conversation that we had about it. One of the things Cindy Colley said was, I hate volleyball. She said, why would Christian parents let their daughters go out in public dressed in their panties? All right? Now, I referee volleyball, and I wonder that sometimes myself. Last week, I refereed a match, and one of the young ladies there was different from all the rest of them because instead of wearing her spandex shorts like the other girls on the team did, she had on a pair of black sweatpants. I don't know anything about her. I don't know who her parents were, but I do know that I respect her for trying to dress modestly. Our young ladies need to think. They need to be sure they're not providing temptation. Now, just because they do, that doesn't justify the men for lusting. There's no excuse for that. It doesn't matter what other people are doing. We're responsible for our own actions. That's what Jesus was saying in Matthew 5:28. Matthew 5:28, he said, whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. The next verse, he said, so don't do it. If thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out. He said it's better to go without an eye than to go to hell with it. He said if your right hand offends you, cut it off. Jesus is not being literal. He doesn't really want us to pluck out our eyes and cut off our hands because you could lust after somebody with your left eye. You could do something wrong with your left hand. What he's saying is you need to eliminate the things that can cause you problems. The eye and the hand in this statement are offenses. If there's a stumbling block that gets in your way, you need to get rid of that. These are enticements to do wrong, and Jesus said Christians shouldn't let those in our life. One person said this. He's saying, take drastic action, get rid of whatever in the natural course of events will tempt you to sin. In other words, men, if you can't go to the beach without looking at people in scantily clad bathing suits, then don't go to the beach. If you can't watch TV without being tempted to sin, turn off your TV. If you get on the computer, you're looking at the wrong websites, unplug your computer. And that doesn't just go for committing adultery. You can't go to the bank without wanting to take all the money. Don't go to the bank. We need to stay away from what causes us problems. Jesus said we need to know where your weaknesses are and do everything you can to avoid them. Saw this on the internet last week. It said, David defeated Goliath but lost to Bathsheba. Our real giants are the desires we haven't killed yet. Think about that. David defeated Goliath, but he lost to Bathsheba. Our giants are the desires that we haven't killed yet. We're looking at the 10 Commandments, and the 7th commandment is thou shalt not commit adultery. We've been looking to see which of the 10 Commandments apply to Christians, and this one does. It's repeated several times in the New Testament. In fact, Jesus said not only don't do it, he said don't think about it. Adultery was a sin under the law of Moses, and it's a sin under the law of Christ. Under the law of Moses, it was a capital offense. It's not against the law in the United States. In fact, it's even promoted as being acceptable. In fact, some people even promote it as being something to be desired, something we should try to do. That's not what Jesus said. We need to remember our citizenship's not in America. This world is not our home. And we shouldn't let anything come into our lives that will block our pathway to heaven. I say this towards the end of every sermon. You need to be a Christian. It's the only life worth living, the only death one would dare to die. But living a Christian life means trying to eliminate all the impediments between you and getting to heaven. If you have anything that's in your life tonight that you'd like to get rid of, you'd like to confess, you'd like to eliminate, if there's anything we can do for you, if we can pray for you in any way, the Lord's invitation is always open. If you have any needs tonight, won't you come right now as we stand together as we sing.